start. Hi, everybody. I am Loreto Sanz Fueyo, Senior Director of Translation for PTW. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you and to talk to all of you. Very quickly, I want to introduce, let me see. I'm going to do a brief introduction about myself and tell you about PTW. PTW was founded 26 years ago, and we've got 35 studios globally, including regions like Shanghai and Japan and Taipei. Our service offering includes functionality QA, LQA, localization, audio, art, and development services. Myself, I started working in games in 2006, leading both LQA and localization teams. And I joined PTW in 2019 with the remit of overhauling the translation department and looking at improving processes and removing the weight from the linguists and the project managers so they could focus on the actual games they were working on. So let's jump straight into well, we're here. Why localize? Is it worth it? Well, short answer is yes. If you're developing in English, there's a large number of people who just don't speak that language. According to 2019 figures from the Ethnologue, we have roughly 379 million speakers of English who are native speakers, and then you have 918 million speakers of Chinese Mandarin and 480 million speakers of Spanish across the globe. And if we put all the speakers of all the native speakers in this table together, that's only 31% of the world's population. Taking a quick look at the distribution of the global games market based on the latest information from Newzoo, we can see that over half of the revenue comes from the APAC region, or rather just under half of the revenue comes from the APAC region. And it's also worth noting that the Middle East and Africa region saw a growth last year of over 14%, but more on this later. Back to the basics. The reason for localization is to reach more users, to take your game to more players. So just another figure, a game that is only in English will reach only 28% of the gaming population. So let's have a look at some other considerations that we have to take into account. Obviously, the first one is ROI. How much is it going to cost me, and how much are the sales going to go up in each territory if I localize? I'll circle back to that one in a few minutes. But the other considerations include what are the users expecting? Is there an active following community that is expecting the game to be available in their language? Do they feel a sense of ownership towards that IP? And how vocal are they about that ownership? Once the game is released, things can change very quickly. Some fans may become very vocal in their territories if the game is not available in their language. And releasing a localized version afterwards could have two implications. On the one side, you have listened to the fans and you have provided them with a localized version. But on the other side, you could they could feel themselves treated as second-class citizens because their language wasn't included in the initial release. So a strong recommendation is, wherever possible, to go with SimShip. Now, looking at localizing your game will obviously increase the downloads and generate positive reviews around the world. This is going to make your game rank higher, and it's going to make it easier to find. More things to think about. What type of game have you got? Is it a game genre and a subject matter that is going to be working really well in certain territories? You can have a look, for example, historically, the Russian market has had a tendency towards role-playing game and strategy games, and in particular, Steam games against, for example, console games. So take that into account. Is it a narrative-heavy game where the player needs to read and understand the text in order to play successfully, to enjoy it, to complete it? How is the lack of that localized text going to affect the enjoyment for the users in that territory? Is the presence of subtitles instead of localized audio going to affect their enjoyment of the game? So you have to decide the level of localization for your game. You can start with the most basic, which is simply the store description. You can also, it's a cheap way, it's an easy way to test the waters. The next one would be a partial or pseudo localization, where you're localizing the in-game text, and if there is audio, you will just localize the subtitles. And then you've got full localization, which includes the above, but also has localized audio, and all graphics will be localized. But you mustn't forget about all the additional content that is going to support the launch of your game in any given territory. I'm talking about marketing campaigns, I'm talking about social media, I'm talking about promotions, developer diaries, knowledge-based articles, etc. These will all enhance the connection that your fans have with the game. What else do you need to take into account? Your monetization strategy. You have to make sure you review it and localize it accordingly. Levels of disposable cash are going to vary from region to region. And not only that, but also users' willingness to part with it. If we go back a few years to when Plants vs. Zombies 2 was launched in China, initially they tried to maximize the monetization, and to an extreme. That made the game way too hard to play and very expensive. This had a very negative effect and brought the rating from 5 stars to 2 stars at one point. The game's economy had to change. They had to find a new balance between the difficulty and when to ask the users for more money. You're also going to have to decide on the culturalization, and this was mentioned earlier on today. It could have cost implications for sure. Do you have to redesign a quest line because of local sensitivities regarding the subject matter? Is the reward system legal in that region, or maybe there's a negative perception towards that reward system? I'm thinking of loot boxes. Do you want to redesign the look of some of your characters to make them more appealing to the audience? Do you need to change some of the specific items, some of the names? I'm thinking of some of the amazing culturalization work Blizzard had to do for some of the World of Warcraft releases for China, just at the top of my head. So these are just some of the considerations. If we're now looking at which platform to release your game on, well, let's have a look at mobile games. The top 5 countries in terms of revenue are presented in this slide. And you can see that China and the US generate roughly the same revenue, but China has a much larger number of players. So there's some interesting data that's, over there. So you have to take into account the popularity of platforms and how they are progressing, how they are changing and evolving. If you put together mobile and tablet, the growth between 2019 and 2020 was 18.5%. But then you can have a look at browser games and they had a drop of 13.4%. So take these trends into account. Also, what is the next gen console penetration in the region you're targeting? That will also dictate what platforms you should support in your game. If we're looking at Steam, English is, maybe not surprisingly, the language that gets the most coverage in Steam with 42%, but Simplified Chinese has 17% coverage in Steam. This is up 10 points from what it was 5 years ago. And Russian, which used to be a powerhouse in Steam, has an 11% share, which is down 6 points from where it was 5 years ago. Again, it's important to take into account all these trends when you're choosing what platform you're taking your game to. Now, going back to that return on investment question, it's a simple question, but it's not an easy, there isn't an easy answer. I've been talking to developers and publishers over many years about localization ROI, and everybody agrees that localization has positively impacted the sales of their games, but nobody was able to give a hard figure on what the exact ROI was, primarily because you don't know what your game would have sold if the localization wasn't there. Miguel Sepúlveda, a globalization manager at King, global localization manager, King rather, wrote an interesting article saying that finding a unicorn or the Yeti or a Holy Grail was like finding the ROI for a game localization program. And he's quite right. You can use a wide variety of formulas calculating the cost of memo queue licenses and the cost of the translators, the cost of the project manager, how long do they spend playing the game to familiarize themselves, etc. And you still will not have the right answer. After much research and calculations, Miguel, like many of us, came to the conclusion that the best way to measure the localization success or the localization contribution to a game's success in a territory is to find a KPI metric that expresses localization sentiment. So how do the users feel in that territory about localization? There are numbers of ways to approach this. You can use AI to analyze forums and to analyze social media, what people are posting about the game. There's other studios like Social Point and Good Game Studios that use user surveys and to analyze to get some metrics in terms of the localization sentiment. So the $1 million question, which territories should I target? We saw earlier these figures. We have a reported revenue for 2020 of 159 billion across the world for games, with the 9.3% growth year on year. And out of that, 40% came from mobile. Again, mobile is playing a really, really big part. It's worth noting as well that 54% of all players across the world are in an APAC country. I'm now going to have a look at some other countries and some more data. Let's have a look at Italy as a country. 1.9 billion predicted as revenue from games for this year, with a growth taking it to 2.8 billion by 2025. Take note of the average. Take note of the average user spend. That is just under $63. And remember that these figures could be skewed by COVID. Greater availability of time, people are spending more time playing, but potentially reduced availability of disposable income in regions where the lockdown has been particularly long. Let's have a look at another territory. We can have a look at Turkey. The revenue predicted for 2021 is $642 million. And over 55% of that is set to come from mobile, which is roughly the same as Italy, but lower than the rest of the territories I'm going to be looking at. The user penetration is lower than in Italy, the same as the average spend per user. So it means that Italy might be ahead of Turkey, particularly when it comes to target for mobile game releases. But what about other territories? Let's take a look at Saudi Arabia. With a revenue of 576 million, it's a bit lower than Turkey. But let's take into account one more thing. Saudi Arabia would require Arabic, and there's $576 million expected for 2021. But that's only one of the territories that you would cover if you're translating into Arabic. UAE would be covered if you translate it into Arabic, with a predicted 200 million revenue for 2021. So Arabic becomes a more interesting proposition. Given the fact that you have access to a larger market, it's a prime candidate for localization, particularly for mobile games. Take a look at the average revenue per user. But it's also increasingly a target for console games. Now let's move to the China region. We know that this is the powerhouse, is the number one country in terms of games revenue. In 2021, it's predicted to bring in $49 billion. So you don't want to miss out on that market. It has a greater user penetration than Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and a higher spend than Turkey, roughly the same as Saudi Arabia. It's also worth noticing that the revenue predicted for 2021 is over double the revenue that was generated in 2015. And this growth was much faster than originally predicted. So this could be setting a trend. Let's have a look at Japan. Data from Statista puts Japan in the top 5 countries in terms of games revenue at 18.2 billion. With the user penetration set to reach 85% by 2025 and an average spend of almost $190 per user, this definitely is a country that you don't want to miss out on. Rounding up as a summary, to the question, should I localize? The answer is, yes, you should. But in order to maximize your investment, there's a few things that you must remember. Know your game, understand the main subject. What makes it special? Are you tied to a particular platform? Are you going to be able to port easily, to adapt to different trends in different territories? Is the subject matter going to cause offense? Do you need to make adaptations and allowances for different territories, particularly taking into account censorship in some regions? Know your market, do your research. This has been mentioned already. Learn all you can about the markets that you are targeting. What are your competitors doing in that region? What can you learn from their mistakes? Plan as much as you can. Start from as early as possible. Think about what territories from the very beginning, because that could dictate some of the design elements that you need to put into your game. And above all, talk to the experts. They'll be able to advise and suggest based on experience. We work on so many games and so many genres, so many platforms, that we are uniquely placed to advise you in terms of territory choice and in terms of the best strategy for localization. Thank you very much. And now I'll hand over back to you.